Hello and welcome to today's podcast. For today's topic, regarding the veterans' experience, we interviewed a former Special Forces sergeant who wishes to remain anonymous. This session will touch briefly on the post-Cold War era and will focus mainly on America's War on Terror, a campaign launched after the September 11th terrorist attacks in 2001. Having joined the military in 1997, when he was 17 years old, this sergeant spent a large portion of his time in countries like Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, and Somalia, gathering many years of experience on the active role the United States was playing in the anti-terrorism campaign. His approximate 14 years spent serving in the military lends itself to the deeper delve we can take into the War on Terror, as well as a personal perspective of America's servicemen's stories. A new era came to light as the Cold War ended. The time periods consisting of the post-Cold War and America's War on Terror were instances where the U.S. imposed its economic and political influences on other countries. While the U.S. had a complex campaign laid out to counteract terrorism, the main reason for interfering with these nations was mostly due to a focus on humanitarian efforts. While on active duty, Sargent was a part of this particular focus.
We say we have the term by, with, and through. So whenever you deploy, one of your main goals is to work with and assist with the indigenous population, or become part of their culture in order to build trust and relationships so that they believe you're there for their cause and not your own. That was extremely important to build relationships with whatever country's population we went into.
As terrorism arose in various forms during this time period, America put pressure on Middle Eastern countries to crack down on terrorists and radical groups. This pressure led to many of these countries experiencing anti-Americanism and a distrust of the American people. To counteract these growing sentiments, the United States used a diplomatic approach in their campaign to build global partnerships and coalitions to further their logical resolution of the extremist groups arising. America's War on Terror was similar to the Cold War because of the newly introduced international political relations the U.S. developed, as well as the important consequences that arose by means of security, human rights, governance, and international law. The first part of the previously mentioned multi-step campaign was military involvement. The military campaign dealt with large-scale wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, a surge in military spending, and the help of U.S. military for regimes that cooperated with the demands of the U.S. There were some groups who the veteran we interviewed worked with in various countries, including Pakistan, to train people to fight. In this case, they were being trained to find Osama bin Laden.
The Pakistani army said they wanted a specialized team to go and hunt for Osama within Pakistan, so we didn't have a bunch of U.S. soldiers running around looking for him. So what we did, we, again, by, with, and through, built their trust and worked with them, right? We gained their trust, they gained our trust, and we worked with them and did missions together.
Intelligence was another important aspect of the plan to combat the War on Terror. It helped increase funding for agencies that gathered intelligence and led to the capture of terror suspects and the tracking and intercepting of money being funneled to terrorist organizations. The third dimension of the campaign was diplomacy. These diplomatic additions included building global partnerships with other countries and leaders. There was also a public diplomacy campaign to counteract anti-Americanism in the Middle East that was sparked by America's pressure on Middle Eastern countries. The last part that contributed to this movement was a domestic approach. In the United States, preventative measures on internal terrorism were implemented, and emergency procedures were looked over and introduced. This also resulted in more security for transportation services within the U.S. All of these measures were taken in reaction to the event that shook all people in the United States to their core. The September 11th attack on the United States shook up the country, to say the least. 4 airplanes were hijacked by the Islamic terrorist group Al-Qaeda and were flown into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. That day will forever be ingrained in the sergeant's memories, as well as most everyone in the country's. This marked the essential start of the official War on Terror.
So I was actually in the field training when I say in the field, like that's a military term so I was actually out training with my platoon when that happened, and we were doing squad battle drills, and we got a call over the radio about the terrorist attack, and within 5 minutes we had all our stuff loaded up. Vehicles were there to pick us up, and this was when I was in the 82nd, when I started in the 82nd Airborne Division. We had our bags already packed. We were always packed. You have different DRFs, which is like a status of readiness, and we were in DRF 1, which is you will wheels up deploy in 24 hours or less. So we had our parachutes issued to us, we had all our bags already packed, and we were just waiting to be called up. We did have folks jump into Afghanistan very shortly after. That was really what I remember from September 11th. Between then and my first deployment to Afghanistan, I actually went to New York and got a piece of the World Trade Center metal, part of the metal beams, and took it with me on deployment. And that was before December. I was deployed well before December. So, the ground was still hot and smoldering. There were still people in there that were, dead, that they were recovering. So I got to experience all of the, families still looking for their loved ones, all of the roses and cards and smells that went along with that. And of course they had security checkpoints all around, so you had to go through them and tell them why you were there. But thankfully I had some friends in construction that work up there, because I'm from Rhode Island actually, born and raised, and they were like, yeah, just come on up. And they gave me a piece of the World Trade Center to take with me on deployment. And after our first deployment to Afghanistan, when people started feeling sorry for themselves, oh, I'm tired, I'd pull out the piece of the metal from one of the I-beams from the World Trade Center. I was like, this is why we're here. That pretty much solved every complaint and gripe and moaning that everybody had. So.
The United States declared war on Afghanistan and Iraq after the September 11th attacks in 2001. The Taliban government was supporting al-Qaeda and was soon overthrown. Looking back on his experiences, our veteran shared his thoughts on how he emotionally reacted to 9/11 then and now.
So again, I was young, so I was extremely angry. I think America as a whole was very angry. I mean, that was the first time that the United States had been attacked in a long time. But over the course of multiple decades, you saw the rise in domestic terrorism. Well, now this is just another level of international terrorism. I think anger is the first reaction. But now that I'm getting older and see things a little bit differently now, having been through everything I've gone through, just my personal experience, I think my first reaction now is just sadness. Like, our world is so hateful. We don't love people like we should. Our immediate reaction to most things that are bad to us is to get mad, instead of pause for a second, try and figure out why that happened, and talk to somebody. Yeah, so 17, anger. Now, sadness.
Some people argue that the involvement of the U.S. in Afghanistan and other countries has brought more negatives than positives. One of their claims includes that the U.S. involvement has caused al-Qaeda to scatter throughout the region, making them harder to counteract. Another claim is that the U.S. attacks on Afghanistan and Iraq have caused a spur of anti-Americanism among the general population of the Middle East, further strengthening the message of terror groups and uniting them against a common cause. Some people have even said that the U.S. government is using the war as a cover-up for a larger geopolitical agenda, such as gaining control over global oil reserves, increasing military spending, and expanding the military's presence around the globe. We asked our veteran whether he believed he was making a positive change in reducing terrorism in response to these claims.
I do. Like I said, a lot of people don't even know a fraction of what's going on right now. While we're sitting here talking, people have no idea. We're constantly improving. We're constantly moving towards a positive outcome on combating terrorism, coming up with new ways to implement on protecting ourselves from counterterrorism and attacks within the United States.
Our Special Forces Sergeant was also a part of the Iraq War. In 2003, the U.S. invaded Iraq due to their possession and creation of weapons of mass destruction, as well as the political rule of Saddam Hussein. Before the war started, the UN tried to limit Iraq's construction of weapons through the use of economic sanctions. There were also terrorists being harbored in Iraq, which was directly against America's war on terror. This was all happening while Iraq's political system was in pieces due to the dictatorship of Saddam Hussein. President Bush gave Saddam an ultimatum to leave Iraq within 48 hours, with which he responded to by refusing. The American capture of Hussein led to a civil war between the Shiite and the Sunni. Both of these groups were trying to obtain power of Iraq due to the absence of Hussein. This war between the Shiite and the Sunni also affected the Kurds in Iraq. Our Special Forces Sergeant noted the differences between these two groups and their interactions with American soldiers.
I mean, take Iraq, for instance. There are so many different tribes within Iraq itself that in the north, with the Kurds, they are very accommodating to U.S. soldiers. They're very supportive. They are very happy to partner with us and fight for their country and their land. But you go into like Sunni or Shiite areas where tribal wars have been going on for forever, literally forever. It's very, very different. When you start intervening with those, you're kind of asking for trouble.
During the Civil War, as alluded to by our veteran, America became allies with the Kurds. Americans originally supported this war due to their fears of terrorism, but they later criticized the government's handling of the situation. The war in northwest Pakistan began in 2004 as the Pakistan Army prompted the effort to drive the Taliban and al-Qaeda out of Waziristan, which the rebel groups used as a way to attack U.S. bases in Afghanistan. The Pakistani government joined the U.S. in the war against terror as they were fighting for a common goal. The U.S. was periodically involved in the war, supporting the Pakistani government, yet many citizens in Pakistan do not support the U.S. within their country. Our veteran explained how the war was not always favorable for them to gain trust.
You have your ups and downs. I mean, you go all the way back to World War I, World War II, Korean War, Vietnam, Gulf War. Anytime you have a war, it's not good for anybody. You can have folks that are so happy you're there to help liberate them and save them from oppressors, but you can have the same people that complain because you're there, because you ruined their front door, or you blew the corner of their house off because you had to blow up a tank or clear an IED or something like that. So you always make enemies during war, even when you're trying not to. It's one of those things that comes with war. When you are trying to partner with somebody in their country, on their turf, with their culture, and you want to try and establish some type of trust, when something bad happens, like you say to the family, well, I'm going to protect you from the terrorists that are going to come in and try and take over your village or your building or your town or your road or your city, and then one of their children dies, they're going to be upset. They're going to yell at you. They're going to tell you, well, how come you said you were going to protect us? How come you didn't do it? That's difficult. You can't save everybody. It's war, and war is not good. People are going to die, always.
As it can be seen, the war on terror can be viewed from many different perspectives. The average citizen of the United States may not know what a veteran has been through, and the veteran may not entirely understand the opposing group's views either. When asked what the hardest part of serving overseas was, our veteran said that it was losing friends and people he cared about. We're all human in the end, and we all care about the lives of those we love. However, for now, it's one mindset against another, and the men and women who are willing to give up their lives for their country. The war on terror is not yet over, and terror groups are still highly prevalent, but with our continued efforts to halt terrorism, the results being reached for can be achieved.